for time, I'm just going to jump straight in. We've got about 27 slides to get through, and hopefully we can get through it fairly quickly. But there again, we may get through it quicker than we actually think so, because if I'm, is this going to work for me? Nope. Oh, here we go. So if I ask the question, what is core stability? I know everybody's going to say doing planks. And basically that's it. So thank you very much for coming. Any questions, please go ahead. Happy to take any. But no, seriously, guys, core stability, I think it's a misleading term. It's about stabilization for functionality, and that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at developing something for sports performance. So it's not always about brute force or brute strength, even though that comes into it to a certain extent. And it's not about endurance, even though that comes into it. And certainly from a plank point of view, when we're sitting there gritting our teeth and we're shaking away for 2, 3, 4 minutes, depending how long, or Michael Cook's case, 30 seconds or less. So there is some sort of endurance involved in it, but ultimately it's not about that. It's about developing something which is going to be practical for us within our sport and performance. So the objectives what I want to look at today from this webinar is what muscles make up the core. And I don't want to spend too much time on that simply because of the Latin involved. It sounds more like spells from Harry Potter than anything else. I want to demonstrate how a strong core improves your force and power output. And by that, I got a video of myself throwing a medicine ball and talking about sort of how forces transfer from the ground through the body, and how your core strength or good stability of that core is going to help transfer those forces more efficiently. I want to also illustrate how a weak core can invite injury, and that's important. First thing we want to do for ourselves as athletes, or first thing we want to do with our athletes, is prevent injury. And that's got to be our priority. So anything we do which injures them isn't good. Anything we can do to prevent injury is good. And finally, and probably from a take-home point of view, for your perspective, I want to come up with some sort of stage progression of how to build an effective and efficient core, how we can actually just have something in place which is structured and progressive, and we can move forward to say, okay, now my core is good enough to move to the next stage, and I know I'm actually heading in the right direction to be more efficient within my sports performance. So looking at what muscles make up the core, ultimately the core is a lumbar-pelvic hip complex. So anything around that hip pelvis area and up the spine, that's what we're looking at. So what we mean by that is that any muscle then which is in that area which we're looking to strengthen, that either originates on the pelvis or on the spine. It's responsible for spinal movement, or as I like to call it, trunk. So our trunk goes into flexion, so that's where we bend forward, or we go into extension, that's where we stand up straight, or we go into lateral flexion where we bend sideways, or we go into rotation where our feet are planted, and that just allows us to kind of spin on some sort of axis. So flexion, extension, lateral flexion, rotation, they're all functional movements which we will use within our sport. So a quick look here, guys. You can see from when we bend over, abdominals are involved and our hip flexors involved. Abdominals mainly for the trunk area. Hip flexors is more about raising the leg, so your thigh becomes parallel with the ground. But still, it's very important we have control over that joint at the hip, and those muscles are very much going to be involved. We need activation and control around that hip pelvis area, so our hip flexors are very, very much involved. Going into extension then, this is where we stand up straight or we're leaning backwards. Then we've got erector muscles which just go up our spine essentially. But again, from what's happening from a leg point of view and a hip point of view, then it's our glute muscles are kicking into play. And we need to have strength in that area and control in that area, so we're able to transfer it efficiently into our sports. Bending sideways, and this is the Harry Potter bit which I was chatting about. There is the quadratus lumborum. Say it too quickly and Dumbledore's hat flies off. We've also got the intertransversary lateris And that allows us to bend sideways. I'm not going to go on with these terms all night, guys. One, because I'm probably mispronouncing them. But two, you're not here to learn the terms. We just want to be functional and practical. And finally, when we're talking about trunk rotation, we're looking at our oblique muscles getting involved, and that just allows us to spin on that axis. So ultimately, if we've got control of all the various muscle groups in those areas, okay, we should be more efficient at our sport. We should be able to flex, extend, rotate, and lateral flex. And the reason I've got a picture of that baseball player there is you can see there's some sort of flexion at the trunk area because his left leg is bent. There's some sort of extension because his right leg is very, very extended and pushed back. He's rotated because we can read what it says athletics on his chest, and his lateral flexion, he's leaning to his left. So obviously these movements are not isolated. They can come in any coordinated pattern, for want of a better term. So we have to make sure we've got stability within the core region, and we've got strength, so we control the joints of what's happening to reduce the potential for injury. So here we go then. We've got, oh, there's that one working. We've got strong core, and we're looking at force and power output. Okay, so the wee dots you see there is where the medicine balls lands. This is yours truly a couple of weeks ago, obviously on a super dry day. On this side, on the left-hand side as you're looking, I'm going to have a knee drive. So I'm going to dip the knees, and I'm going to drive up through the knees and throw the medicine ball as far as I can. On the right-hand side, I'm just going to get into my tiptoes. The reason I'm on tiptoes is because that's how I finish on the left-hand side. I'm going to get in the tiptoes and just let my arms do the work. And all I want to do is demonstrate to you about the kinetic chain, about creating force from the ground through the legs, the power of that legs, and then how it transfers into the trunk. And I'll talk about that later. But if you see from this video, hopefully, and this is going to play for you, and they're going to go simultaneously. There you go, same time. You can see that I throw the ball further, the medicine ball further, when I've got bend in the legs. So just pause in here, see the legs starting to go on down. Counter action is I start standing up and creating a force in the legs. That force has to transfer into my trunk. Then, depending how efficiently I deal with it in that trunk area, it's how it manifests into the arms to allow me to throw that ball any further. So now we're aware of the kinetic chain and how it works. The question becomes, well, how do we develop this? So what we're looking at from the kinetic chain is this: power in the legs transfers to the trunk and to the back. Okay, and that's what we're chatting about today. That's the core area. That's where we need to have stability. That's where we need to have strength of control of the joints and the movements. Okay, so we can transfer that force from here to here very efficiently, and we can transfer the force from this area into the shoulder area efficiently. We want to maximize what we've generated down here into this point here. Otherwise, it just becomes a waste of time. So the more stable the core, the more efficient the force transfer. And the opposite is true, is the less stable the core, the less efficient is the force transfer. Because if our core is not stable and we're not strong, we don't have control in this area, then what happens is all the force we generate down here, or a lot of it, that leaks out left, right, and center, and we start to lose that force. Okay, which means if we start losing that force, we've got less control of what's going on, so it becomes a less efficient movement pattern, and it increases our chances of injury. And as I said at the start, our primary concern has to be not injuring our athletes. If we're injuring our athletes, then perhaps we should stop coaching. A simple demonstration of a weak core and potential injury is from this photograph here. So we've got somebody doing the press-ups on the right-hand side. You can see there's a strong core as they go through the motion. The picture on the left-hand side, you can see there's a weak core. Now, the transfer of force from here is obviously coming from the hands, not from the feet as it was in the video, but also the fact that the feet are planted on the ground, that they're a stabilizing factor and they're producing a counter force. So in this press up, we've got a lot of force coming from the arm shoulder area, and not a lot of force, and some force, sorry, coming from the feet, and they're having to meet into the middle. And as you can see on the picture on the left-hand side there, where there's definitely a core strength issue, that the transfer of the forces from shoulder to feet or from feet to shoulder just isn't efficient enough, and we're introducing potential for injury. So looking at what a weak core is, what we've got here is a yellow line showing where the pelvis is sitting, and we've got an anterior pelvis tilt. In other words, the pelvis is tilting forward. So if you think of a pelvis as being a bucket of water, what we've got is muscles pulling on it that is spilling that water out of the front, and that's kind of the angle that the pelvis is sitting at. So what's causing this tilt? Well, from this position here is that we've got tight muscles in the back, and those tight muscles in the back are actually pulling the back of the pelvis in an upward direction. But unfortunately, our abdominal muscles, they're not as strong to counter that. Okay, so there's a strength balance issue of what's going on. And because of those weak abdominal muscles, that's allowing the muscles at the back to pull the pelvis upwards. Similarly, we've got tight hip flexors at the front. So those tight hip flexors are pulling the front of the pelvis forwards and downwards. And our glutes, like our abs, they're weak. Okay, and because we don't have strong glutes, we've lost control of the movement of that pelvis area. So from that photograph, you can see we've got a tight upper body, okay, and we've got tight hip flexors. And because of that, our glutes are getting pulled up as well, because our glutes are attached to that area. Our glutes are getting pulled up as well. And because our glutes are getting pulled up, our hamstrings are being pulled up. So suddenly we got pain in the back, we've got pain in the hip flexors, and we've got pain in the hamstrings. And we'll walk around saying, oh, I've got an awful sore back. And the reality is it's not, it's just we don't have any stability or strength in our core region. So bringing this into a practical term then, if we've got poor posture and poor alignment, and you can see the yellow line there on the photograph that's you can see, that should be a straight vertical line if we had good alignment, if we had good core strength, and it's not. There's a wee kink in it. And the problem with that kink is it gives us poor alignment, and that transfers into what we're doing when we're running. So we're kinked forward when we run. And because of that kink forward when we run, it causes problems in the area of the hip. And as you can see, the hip is dropping down to the left-hand side. And to counter that, because we're always into forces and balancing ourselves out, the shoulders are dipping to the right-hand side. So you can now see there's a kink in the spine when we look at this from the front. So what happens with the pelvis or the hip being low on the left-hand side, as you can see there, is that the leg, when the foot strikes the ground, the foot is thinking, okay, the ground is in a certain position, but because the hips are lower, the foot's hitting the ground earlier than it thinks it should be. So as such, it throws the knee out of alignment. So we've now pushed the knee out to the right, out to the side. And force is like traveling in straight lines, up and down. That's how we're efficient with our force. So suddenly we've got a bend in our knee, okay? And because there's a bend in the knee, it's out of alignment. We've lost that efficiency in the kinetic chain. Because there's a kink in our hips, because it's dropped one side, it's not sitting straight, we've lost efficiency in the kinetic chain. Because there's a kink in our spine, we've lost efficiency in the kinetic chain. And we're leaking energy left, right, and center. So the other problem with this is, and I've already told you, our athlete here has got a tight back, he's got tight hamstrings, he's got tight glutes, he's got weak abdominal muscles, he's got tight hamstrings, but he's now got a knee being pushed out of position, so he's now got a sore knee to go on with everything else. So the poor guy is going to be spending a lot of money and a lot of time at the physiotherapist getting sorted out. Now, if we can actually get that balance into place, so our abdominals are as strong as the muscles in our back, and our glutes are as strong as our hip flexors, so we balance ourselves out, you can now see that it gives us good alignment. So good alignment means a straight line going through shoulders, right the way down the spine, through the hips, through to knees. That's seen there in our running man. We've got a nice straight alignment, a good strong alignment. And you can see that sorted out the hip issue. So the hip's not dropping down now when we're moving and we're running. And it's sorted out the knee strike, or the position of the knee when the foot's striking. So everything is now in a nice straight line. Legs in a straight line. So we're getting good use of that kinetic chain, the good forces coming on through. And all this is because we've got core stability. All this is because we've actually built good alignment, because we've got a balance of strength at the front of our body, at the back of our body, at the lower of the body, front and back, below the hip. So, excuse me. So what we can conclude from this is having a stable core provides a number of things. Obviously, correct posture, you can see that. It corrects movement alignment, you can see that. It improves the efficiency of movement and power and force production, both in creating forces and receiving them for us to dissipate them, and it reduces injury. So I suppose the key question is, how do we go about stabilizing our core? Okay, and what's the process? Well, the process has to be staged. So we've got core control and strength base. That goes on to core strength of the movement challenge, stabilization with primal movements integration, prepare for power, and being explosive. And I'll come to primal movement when we come onto that slide. So what we've got is core control and strength base. So initially, we can see here, we've got somebody on the far left-hand side, they're going into a cat-camel position. So we're learning how to activate and deactivate muscles which flex the spine, which extends the spine. Also, the pelvis is working here. Also, the shoulder stability is working here. And we're teaching our body how to recognize that movement, how to switch on, and that we've got some sort of stability. The hips get involved in the top right, or in the right-hand photograph with the blue top, and we've got some sort of glute bridge going on. That's going to activate the glutes. But again, we've got pelvic control here, because we can actually arch the back at the bottom to push it into extension, and then roll the pelvis forward. So we've got flexion before we're driving it up. Again, we're controlling the joint, we're getting the correct activation through the movement. And in the bottom picture, as you can see in purple, that's a bird dog. And what we're doing is challenging balance, because you can see opposite hands on the ground to opposite knee, but we're getting correct alignment of shoulder movement and leg movements. So we're trying to bring them in line, coordinate them together, but we've still got the activation and control around the joint areas. Sets and reps control that, guys, quite simply. On the other side, you can see we've got strength development, and it's good old-fashioned planks. Okay, on the planks, with the time sets, we've got a straightforward plank, we've got a side plank, we've got a reverse plank. You know, work on it up to 2 minutes, 3 minutes, wherever it is. If you can get to 2.5 minutes without panicking, without, you know, shaking, and you find it quite comfortable, then you've probably developed enough strength to move on to the next section. So in the next section, what we've now got is core strength of the movement challenge. So the picture on the top left hand, you can see is more or less a plank, but we've now added a leg raise with it. So there's a sort of Spider-Man movement, or a bear crawl movement, or a rock climber movement. So again, everything we're activated through that core stability is activated here. But now what we're saying is, right, our core's activated, all those muscles are switched on, but now we're going to move one of our joints, and you're going to deal with it. And we're teaching our nervous system, and we're teaching everything in that area to deal with that and realize what's happening, so it activates appropriately, so it's nice and safe. The picture on the bottom left, glute bridge with a leg extension. Now, you can either stick the leg in the air before you go into the glute bridge, or you get into a glute bridge and then raise the leg. But either or, there's challenges here from a balance perspective. The core's got to stay on. It has to deal with that challenge. But we've got joint movement. There's hip extension going on here. There's knee extension going on here. So the body has to deal with it, has to learn to deal with it. The side plank now has a rotation. Rotation is a functional movement in sport. So again, everything we've learned to control and activate and get switched on in our side plank, that stays in place with a rotation. It starts to learn, our body starts to learn how to cope with that movement, that additional challenge. And then on the Swiss ball there, or the gym ball, or the physio ball, whatever you want to term it, we've got a hip thrust. And the hip thrust comes into place. We've now got back extension, we've got glute extension, glute activation, so it's hip extension. And the challenge is the actual Swiss ball is want to move away from us left to right. And so we have to learn how to control that. So once we've mastered that, and again, you can either do it through times or you can do it through sets and reps. And again, once you're comfortable with an appropriate size and that your technique is good, we get to move on and look at stabilization with primal movement integration. So what I mean by primal movement integration is quite simply the human body only moves so many ways. We squat, we lunge, albeit we can lunge in different directions. We can push, we can pull, we can rotate, and we have movement like a gait. Also, we hip hinge. So what I've done here now is gone, okay, our body's stable. We know how to turn things off and on. We know how to activate. We've got simple movement patterns. Now we throw it into something which we do on an everyday basis. So as you can see on the far left-hand side with the turquoise top, we've got press-ups with a stability ball. That's a push movement. But that ball is wanting to move left, is wanting to move right. So it's a challenge to our core. We've got somebody standing on the Bose ball at the top left hand, and they're pulling something. So that weight they're pulling is going to be a challenge to want them to pull them off that ball. They've got to fight and they've got to stabilize to stay in place. Underneath that, we've got somebody doing a lunge with a medicine ball overhead. So we've now moved a weight to overhead, and we're getting into a lunge position. So we're challenging our core stability of being nice and erect and tall as we're stepping through a controlled movement. And it's a running movement. That's what a lunge is. It's a running movement. Top right hand, you can see somebody on a Swiss ball and they're doing a rotation. They're being challenged with a medicine ball, so there's a bit of weight there, and that's going to want to change the center of gravity and pull off that. Again, everything we've learned through control of the joints in that area, activations of the muscles to control that area, that is now kicking it in while they're going through that range of motion. Below them, you've got somebody that's doing a pike, and that's a hip hinge. So now we've got trunk flexion. The legs are extended. When the Swiss ball rolls back, we're starting to get extension in the trunk, but we have to control the speed of movement. We have to activate the muscles to control those joints and make sure we're efficient with our movement. And then the final photograph we've got on the far, on the far right-hand side is somebody squatting. Now, albeit they've got a ball behind them, but that ball is wanting to move left and right. So they have to maintain good squatting form throughout that range of movement. So they're maintaining that activation. So everything is, again, stepping forward to something which is functional for sport. Looking now then at preparing for power, because obviously in sport, we want to be explosive, we want to be powerful, but we just don't want to just jump into it. So we've now got transfer of movement, which is a little bit more challenging into our core stability. So the guy in the red t-shirt holding the disc on the left-hand side, if that disc is moved around in circles, just at the shoulder, clockwise, anti-clockwise, or moved up and down or moved diagonally, then the core is going to have to be activated to take the changes of position of that load. The load will be not from a contraction point of view, but there's going to be an eccentric load in that the actual load is going to be off-centered. And the trunk has to deal with that. If he suddenly throws that out to his left-hand side and he's holding it to the left, then he's going to have to deal with that, a lot of weight on the left side, and has to come up with a counterbalance to the right-hand side. So he's encouraging correct activations. We've got a lunge with a rotation with a medicine ball. And again, that medicine ball rotation is throwing a weight out, moving the center of gravity, challenging stability, challenging the activation of the core. We see we've got a squat with a big stretch and they're holding a medicine ball. And again, that medicine ball through the range of movement, that's causing a challenge to the center of gravity. Excuse me, it's causing a challenge to the center of gravity. But we're getting used to going through that range of movement and getting those activations in place from a stability point of view. And then finally, we've got a press up where we've got one hand on a medicine ball. And again, that's off-centered. We're not going to be balanced because his left hand, okay, is sitting higher than the right hand. So it's going to change how far he can actually move through the action of the press up. And that means his core has to adapt. It has to change. So we're coming, sets and reps on that, guys. Sets and reps, load where needed. So we're coming near the end here. Explosive. This is what we want to do just before going into sport. So if we've gone through that step-by-step process, we can now see by doing sort of slams with a good drop of a squat action that we can get our core involved and be really, really powerful and make sure that kinetic change of use to us is being efficient. You can see the top center photograph. There is a lunge or a kneel with rotation. Again, we're challenging with the throw of that medicine ball to activate our core. So we're making sure the transfer of forces and kinetic chain is efficient. Below that, there's a step and a throw. Again, an explosive movement, an accelerative movement. And again, we're looking at the activation of the core for efficiency of the chain, kinetic chain, which is going on here. And finally, on the left-hand side, right-hand side, you can see there's an overhead medicine ball throw. And that, again, is a weighted throw, but it's an explosive throw. But because we've gone through the progressions, when we go through this movement, activations kick in, which control our joints and protect our athlete through that range of movement. And again, we can monitor this through reps and loads. So it's important that we don't miss stages. Everybody can pick up a medicine ball and we can do that, okay? But if we do that without building our strength first and our control, that means that we're not curing our alignment. We're not curing the deficiencies we have. We're not curing our weak core, our unstable core. And this is going to lead to poor movement patterns. It's going to lead to less efficient power transfer, and it's going to lead to potential injury. So we do have a stage process, guys. Make sure we go through that we get the core control, strength base first. Then we get core strength to that movement challenge. And then we build that with stabilization and primal movement integration. Then we can prepare for power. Then we can be powerful. Ultimately, we want a good, stable core where everything is activated to protect our joints and not something which is going to injure our athletes. That's the end of the presentation for myself. Questions, I believe, are coming at the end. There is some references on that. Most of those are photographs that I've stolen. But that's me done, guys. Thank you very much for listening.
Kevin, thank you very much. Very good presentation. Great to see so many exercises in there that the guys could take away with them. Just to confirm that everyone will get a copy of the presentation sent out to them, so you will be able to see all of those exercises again. But again, I would just encourage people now to take a moment, and any questions, feel free to send them through in the group chat or stick your camera on and ask a question.
Kevin, can I ask you a question, please?
Yes.
Firstly, can we dispel your statement at the start there to say I could only do a 30-second plank? I can definitely get that up to about 34, 35 seconds now. So
no, I said do a plank, not hold a plank. I know you used to be a scaffolder, so.
All right, okay. So the thing for me, and I have seen you coaching, and I think you're very good at this. How do you take those movements that you explained at the or displayed at the end there and make them fun and a coach? So if I'm a coach, I'm thinking, right, how can I actually take those movements, bring them some gamification into it, make it fun?
Yeah, I thought, yeah. listen, unfortunately, COVID's got a lot to answer. There's a couple of ideas that got in my head, and immediately I just go, no, you can't do that because of COVID. But listen, in an ideal world, in a non-coughing world, you know, if you're in a position where you've got a group of athletes lying next to each other, and you get into a press-up position to hold a plank as opposed to doing press-ups, and then everybody, what you got to do is kind of get some sort of rotation and high-five the person next to you, and they take that, and then they pass it on down the line, or you can do it in a circle or something like that. And you get sort of fun challenges: who can get around the circle fastest if you've got 5 or 6 different athletes. If you're throwing things like medicine balls, that become who can throw it the furthest. So there's challenges involved that. Who can throw it at the coach's head and get closest to them. That's always a good one. I always give out money for that. So yeah, listen, I appreciate it. It's absolutely boring. There's nothing worse than sitting in a plank and just going on and on and on. So it's about how do you challenge that? So can you, if you're doing a glute bridge, can you balance a football on your abdomen while you're doing it to try and stop it falling off? Can you get into those positions and move a cone down the line? So I'm holding a cone, I pass it to you, it comes back, or I've got to place a cone onto your back, and the person the other side of you has got to take the cone off your back or something like that. Can you balance something on somebody's back? Because I always say when you're doing a plank, you want to be in a position as if you're a table and my tea is sitting on top of it, and you don't want to spill my tea because I get grouchy if you spill my tea. So, you know, stick a cup of water or something on their back and have it sitting there. That'll hold them, you know, hold them in position. So yeah, listen, there's things away, there's things around it. The coaches just dive in and just have a go. Just see what you think is fun. There's no harm.
Thank you.
Kevin, there's questions coming through the group chat there, just asking, how long should you spend on each stage, roughly? Would there be an indication? I know you mentioned there doing a plank for a couple of minutes, but what about the reps? How long do you think it takes to build up that stability?
Yeah, and that when it comes to anything that I've done, and certainly from a strength and conditioning perspective, not just necessarily in core strength, but generally, it's you want to make sure it's within the competency of your athlete, and that's where it comes down to. And I think it's a great question. So if your athlete is struggling, so let's take the first stage where we're just in planks, basic plank positions, and your athlete has only managed to do 10 or 12 seconds in that position, then you're going to have to stay on that stage probably to develop them out of it. Now you're going to come up with a strategy of, okay, you only did 10 seconds on this. What we're going to try to do is get you to 15 seconds. Then we're going to have to try and get you to 20 seconds. And that's not done in a week or two. That's going to take weeks and weeks and weeks and possibly months. So you want to get to the point where after 2 minutes, they're not struggling with the exercise. There's no real sort of fatigue or anything kicking in. They've got that muscular endurance. Then if they're at that stage, you know that they need to move on to the next point. The challenges then come in with the movement where we start looking at it from sets and reps perspective. And again, it's about the quality of control and movement. So if you see somebody, and let's get into that rock climber position. So you're in a plank position, you've got one of your legs raising up. If you find, say our challenge is 3 sets of 10, if you find they get to 2 sets of 10 and they're okay, but by the 3rd set of 5 or 6, but the technique is going all to pot, then you probably need to come back and say, okay, let's look at this from 2 sets of 10, 3rd set of 5, and then let's build that to 7, and then let's build that to 10, and then you're looking at the competency of the athlete. Once the athlete can perform the exercise with decent technique, that's when you move on to the next stage. The last thing you want to do is rush the athlete. And I suppose bringing it into an understanding, I suppose something we can actually all picture. If we took the squat and we had somebody with weight on her back doing a squat, and they're able to squat with 20 kgs on the back for 10 with good technique, we'll put on 5 kgs either side. So let's say now, okay, so then now that makes, what's that? Does that make 30? Is it 25, 30? Yeah, so that makes 30 kgs. I'm good at maths. So that now makes 30 kgs. If we find that after 2 reps, this squatting technique is absolutely rubbish, then the competency of the athlete's gone. We need to strip that load off and go for a lighter load. Let's go for 25 kgs. If they're only doing 5 or 6, let's take that load off and go for 22 kgs. We want to stay within the limits of our athlete's competency. We don't want to go outside of that. Everything is a steady progress. So depending on how good your athlete is at each stage, means they could get through it in a week, or they could be at that stage for 6 or 7 weeks, and you're going to have to come up with a strategy of how to slowly advance them. And if that becomes a challenge of, okay, you went for 30 seconds last time, this week we're in, let's see if we can get to 35 seconds. Right, that's great. You got to 35 seconds. Next week, let's see if we can get to 40 seconds. So we're not actually saying, oh, you've done your 30 seconds, they're shaking, oh, hang in there for, and force them to do 2 minutes. That becomes pointless, because they're not getting the correct activations, they're not getting the correct control. So come up with a steady, progressive overload that is within their competency, that brings them to the point of 2 minutes where they're comfortable in a holding position. They can do 3 sets of, I don't know, probably 10 or 15 in a movement side of things. Then you're able to advance it accordingly.
Kevin, thanks very much. We do have another questions that come in there, but I'm going to hold it to the very end just to see how we're doing for time, if you don't mind, and we'll revisit that at the end. So look, we'll move on to your second speaker of the evening, and I'd like to introduce Gary Worgan. Gary is a coach of leaders and teams across sectors from sport to education to industry. Gary has led the way in guiding coach development away from the technical expert to a coaching process and philosophy that places the players at the heart of the coaching process. Gary, over to you. You're just on mute still there, Gary, sorry.
Yeah, thanks very much. All right, cheers, Keith. Kevin, thank you too. Actually, now I know why I've had so much back and hamstring trouble over the years, mate. So thank you very much for that. Interesting, isn't it? It's the how much we know about scientifically now, how much we know about a lot of different sides of sport, actually, that we just didn't know. Actually, we didn't know when I started playing, at least. Okay. So I've got a short presentation here, guys. I'm going to take a bit of a shallow dive into about 3 or 4 different concepts around sports psychology, or just generally like athlete learning. I'm going to ask Michael Cook, if you can come off mute, and if you can give me a little nudge when they say about 5 minutes to go, that'd be really handy. What I'm going to encourage you to do, a bit like you did in Kevin's session, if you've got any questions, then hold them for the end. But because we're taking a bit of a shallow dive, I think to if you do have any questions, and that's how you're going to tailor it. Okay. So just start with a whistle-stop tour of me. Okay. Struggled a bit in education, actually, but found my place in sport. That's my cricket club there. I feel incredibly fortunate, actually. Incredibly fortunate. I had a great experience in cricket, and that cricket club really stood out for me for a number of reasons. I then went on to have a career with the ECB, worked for 10 years. So got into coaching quite early, coached the junior section at 19 years of age. That cricket club you're looking at no longer exists, actually. Worked in the ECB, worked for 10 years, training different coaches and coach educators in high performance environments. And now, interestingly, I've wandered slightly away from sport, worked with a lot of different organizations, actually train executive and business coaches, but also work in the UN. I'm actually noticing, just revisiting and coming back to sport, actually takes me right back. Okay, so there's 4 basic principles that I want to just take a light touch into. And they were really important and modeled out to me when I was part of that junior section. I used them within my coaching practice when I started out coaching. I used them in high performance environments as a player, but also as a coach. And now I use them in, business environments, working with CEOs of big organizations as well. The principles of learning, the principles of our own growth and development, whether we're players, coaches, or whether we're in business roles, they sort of stand up, they sort of stay the same. And I want to share definitely 3 of those. And if we get time, I'm going to share the 4th one with you as well. So the first one is a basic contracting process, and this was really modeled out by my coaches, actually, from a young age. They were very clear, and we all had to sign a charter, and the parents had to also, which clearly stated their expectations of us as players. But also within that, it stated very clearly what to expect from the coaches and to expect from the cricket club, and vice versa. So everything within that contract process, we signed up to as soon as we started. And basically, like any relationship, like a coach to player relationship, coach to athlete relationship, the hard work was done and the conditions were set for real psychological safety and trust within that process. Because we knew exactly what to expect from each party going in. Now, I know it sounds a really simple thing, and we're sort of thinking, well, I sort of do that with my players, or I've sort of done that with my coach. But actually, it's often the thing that gets missed out. A bit like in a relationship, if you haven't contracted right from the outset, it's very difficult to change the goalposts and change the boundaries. So the importance of that within that psychological safety of that coach to athlete relationship is absolutely fundamental. So that's contracting. The second one is a bit of a process and model about learning. There's lots of models and stuff about learning. This is one that really resonated with me as a kid. I used it then within coaching, but I also used it to train over 500 coach educators within the ECB. And it's a very simple, very basic model. Basically, all it is if we don't do one of these 4 stages, we compromise the whole learning process. Okay, so if we don't reflect on our practice, if we don't connect it to our own ideas and our own experiences and our own beliefs, we don't really believe it, we don't really own it. And if we don't do that, we're less likely to come up with an action plan or something that we're going to do differently. And it's less likely then that we'll shift behavior. It's less likely that anything will change as a consequence of that. And again, it's a really, really simple model. And we might think, well, yeah, we do this all the time. But actually, we'll be drawn to different things based on our own personality. So if you're an activist, you'll love jumping into do. And that's where you'll be, that's where you'll hang out, and bit like this stuff, you'll want to come in, you'll want to go first, that's the activist in us. If you're a bit of a reflector, then you'll take your time, and that's the thing that you'll be drawn to, is that reflective process, and you'll really enjoy that reflective process. Okay. If you're a theorist like me, you want to know why, you want to dig underneath, you've got a lot of questions, you'll let others go first, but that's the thing that you'll do well, but you'll probably do it at the expense of other things as well. And similar, if you're a pragmatist, you want to plan the backside off of everything. You'll have lists for everything that you do. So I suppose all it shines a light on really is each one of those 4 is really important to us. And it's really important as part of the learning process. And if you know as an athlete that you're drawn to 1 or 2 of these, then it's consciously developing the other 2. Now, if I just focus on reflection, because that's probably the most important part of the learning process, we sort of think that reflection is quite a, critically breaking down our own practice, and we've come to realize in recent years actually we can really positively focus our reflection efforts as well. But there's 3 different dimensions of reflection. There's the reflection, the classic reflection that we all know, which is once you've had a performance, once an event has happened, you then look at what you did well and what you didn't do so well, for example. That's reflecting on action. Okay. The thing that we're really trying to develop within our players, within our athletes, and as athletes, is reflecting in action. Okay, and that's that developing that ability to think on our feet, ability to be intuitive, reflect in the moment. And we misunderstand that a little bit. We think that that's just developed through playing the game. Well, actually, it's a cultivated reflective skill to be able to be part of the action, but still reflecting in action on what's happening. So as the game's going along, making shifts and adapting to what your opponents are doing, that's a really good example of a player performing at a high level, reflecting in action. But then there's the third dimension, which for me is the most interesting one, actually, which can give you lots of opportunities to learn without actually getting into the game. And I suppose in COVID times, that's actually really important, which is the reflecting on action that's not happened yet. And obviously we know that as visualization and things of that nature. Yeah, that's absolutely true. But also it's playing the movies out, playing out different scenarios, playing out different situations and imagining the consequences. And that is an incredibly powerful thing for an athlete to do, because it means that they can improve and get better and accelerate that learning process without actually being involved physically within the practice itself. And obviously watching video analysis and stuff like that and breaking down what's going on the TV, that's actually a really useful way of reflecting on scenarios and on action that may happen. So that's the Kolb learning cycle, just a really great way to reflect on anything and accelerate our own learning process. Okay. The third one I want to share with you is actually something that's emerged as being really fundamental in everything that I do, whether I'm working with coaches, whether I'm working with players, or whether I'm working with executives. It hasn't really changed, to be honest. Our mindset is very reflective within our behavior. And obviously you've got the visual there, and you can, as long as you're on a screen big enough, you can read that for yourselves. But it's a pretty obvious thing, really. Holding a growth mindset means we believe that we can learn and we can change. And let's say our athletes, for example, can learn and they can change. Okay. Having a fixed mindset doesn't necessarily believe that you can't learn, but you become very fixed and very obsessed with the outcome, very obsessed with winning. You feel threatened by other people's successes. You avoid challenge, you give up easily. Okay. I won't go into the science or the background of this work, because I think that's a lot less interesting than picking a real good live example. So I was just having a think before I come on the call, actually, from a sporting perspective, there's actually two really brilliant examples. And you can have a really positive fixed mindset, which is quite interesting. And there's a lot of people that will defend that. So I'm not championing a right or a wrong. However, I do obviously promote having a growth mindset in terms of performance environments that feels overtly useful. There's two different teams that I can think of, actually, and they're both English football teams, so apologies for that. But the first is Watford. That's a really good example of a positive fixed mindset. Okay, so they probably got through, I don't know, about 15 managers in the last 10 seasons, something like that, quite a lot, right? And the idea being that a new manager would come in, they'll rah-rah the troops, they'll get people going, they'll shout at people, they'll scream at people, have a really hostile, highly competitive sort of, let's say, masculinized style of leadership, and then for a while then that will obviously peak performance, and then it will start to sustain itself for a little bit, right? But actually after a period, here's what happens in a positive fixed mindset culture, dressing room, for example. The performance then dips off, because what happens is you get real mistrust amongst the players, people are starting squabbling, etc., etc. So what then happens in a positive fixed minded culture is you nuke the thing and you start again. What Watford do is they just get in a new manager. So as the performance starts to fall off, the new manager comes in and up they dive again, and then they the rah-rah the troops and off they go again. That's a really good example of a positive fixed mindset culture, and it kept them in the Premier League for a good while. Not working as well lately, but doing okay. So that's a really good example of positive fixed mindset. So a bit of a hostile dressing room, probably a bit of a toxic environment, but at times when you're winning, it's fine. It's only when you're losing that there's a real blame culture that starts to kick in. Okay. So that's an example of the fixed one. I was trying to give an example of the growth one. Now, there's a lot of, for example, football managers that have come into the game that have a really growth mindset. You look at the Klopps and Guardiolas of this world. They create and cultivate and curate an environment that is prime for everyone believing that they can do a lot better than they first thought that they could. If you've got someone else believing in you more than you believe in yourself, that promotes this really high level, high performance, high growth environment, obviously naturally, right? And they know they've got people in senior positions that are going to stick with them and going to back them. A really good example is Southampton. They've been drummed twice, 9-0. The management has stuck by them, stuck with them. Obviously, they're still trying to come out the other side of their second one. But you saw the exponential growth that happened as a consequence of that loss. What happens when we get drummed 9-0 in a growth mindset environment is we learn a shed load very quickly. In those really tight games, you go, we should have won that, and you don't really learn as much. But when you get drummed, that is the most prime point for any player and any team to learn. But in a fixed-minded environment, that there's blame and a lack of personal responsibility. In a growth-minded environment, as you saw with Southampton, they went on over a fairly sustained, successful period. So 2 really interesting examples of a positive fixed mindset and a really well modeled out growth mindset. And you'll notice actually within the youth system at Southampton, they're really supportive of the young players, and a lot of the young players go on and play at other clubs. And a lot of players obviously want to go and play for that team. That's the other thing, is people are really, really drawn to growth-minded leaders, growth-minded coaches, growth-minded captains, for example, is a really, really good example. All right, let's check on time, 10 minutes. So I'm going to share the last one with you now. I'm going to do a bit of a whistle stop of this because there's people that train for years in this stuff, psychologists, and it's called transactional analysis. Don't be frightened off by the name itself. I want to get to the guts of why I'm sharing it with you today. So it's very simple, in a mature sort of calm place where we're all taking personal responsibility, for example, for our behavior. There is adult dialogue. However, most, if not all relationships at some point in the dialogue end up with a parent and a child. And often it's a controlling parent, or you have a nurturing parent as well. And a controlling parent relationship between a coach and a player, for example, will bring out a compliant or rebellious child within that player. A player that really just follows the rule, does what they're told, or a player that's actually quite rebellious in that environment. But not a player, not an athlete who's independent of thought, who's a free thinker, who can think on their feet, who is empowered, who is enabled to perform when they set out to perform. Okay, so that's the basis of it. And I'm looking here, I suppose I'm honing in on the coach to athlete relationship. And child in this sense isn't referring to someone who's under 18, for example. In that junior section, here's a really good story, I suppose, of it. I was made a captain when I was 10, and I was told to pick the batting order and pick the bowlers and set the fields and do everything on that field. And I wasn't looking forward to telling my mates they were batting number 10 and number 11, as a 10-year-old, it felt like a horrible burden, right? What I didn't realize at the time, from a transactional analysis perspective, they would treat me like an adult. They believed in me, they trusted in me, they wanted me to go out there and make my decisions and learn. And as a consequence, at the age of like 11 or 12, I'd learned a load of stuff about how to manage different personalities, make tough decisions on the field, live with consequences, deal with failure when it's your decision. All of those things that a 12-year-old shouldn't be learning about, for example, really, not in the way that we were conditioned and educated. But actually, why not? And what was modeled out to me is brilliant adult behavior, even though actually they were dealing in that instance with a very young player. I put together this table. This actually really helps a lot of people that I coach and a lot I work with. But I think it's really interesting. Because they say, well, what do you mean? You know, what do you mean by staying in adult? What do you mean by adult relationships? And actually, you know, it's not judging, being really consistent in the way that you show up, in the way that you deliver your promise and expectations, like set out within the contracting. You know, it's how much you stay in the rational, see in the bigger picture. And how do we know that we're wandering over to this negative parent? So if you look at the extreme left, that's the controlling parent. You know, can be a bit critical sometimes, can feel a bit dominant and a little superior. You know, can play the rescuer when there's failure. You know, can say, oh, well, don't worry about it. It's not your fault, all that kind of stuff. And that's the nurturing parent that comes out of us. In that case, can be quite volatile. You know, up when we win, down when we lose. What you're going to get as a consequence of that, if that's the relationship between coach and athlete, what you're going to get from the athlete is high anxiety, defensiveness, argumentative, feeling like the victim, playing the victim in different situations. And I suppose the moral to this story is, once you set a tone for a parent-child dynamic and relationship, do you know it's really, really hard to bring it back to an adult one? You've almost got to start again and recontract between the athlete and the coach. And in that sense, I think it's a really good model, because sometimes we all slip into controlling parent. And I suppose this gives us a language around noticing when we do it more, and the impact that it has. Because obviously what we're trying to create is really empowered, independent, free-thinking athletes, either in ourselves, you know, or in our players.
Sorry, can I just jump in with a quick? I'm going to give you a time reminder as well, just that you asked for with 5 minutes to go. But just on that, I'm really interested in that transactional analysis. One of the things for me is, like, sport, you mentioned the word volatile, and it can be really volatile in terms of our emotions. And as you say, you know, a result can really change the way we feel in any sport at any level. How have you seen really effective strategies of being able to stay an adult during those times of, you know, feeling really high or really low?
Yeah, it's probably the $1 million question, isn't it, really? I think for me, it's all about having an awareness for it. And if you've got a very simple language for it, you could be aware of it. You know, I wouldn't have noticed it in myself without this language. Whereas having it now, like even with my friends and colleagues, I can feel when I'm like, oh, here's the old Michael again, or whatever it might be, and I start to shift into that judgmental side of me, you know.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's the key, isn't it? It's just noticing that within ourselves. But I suppose the key bit is noticing it within your players, isn't it? You know, if they're not taking personal responsibility, if they're not stepping up, if you give them a problem or a challenge and they give up quite easily, like linked to the growth mindset, then you know that you're doing something wrong within that dynamic, or as an athlete, you know that the environment isn't being created for you.
I think that you're absolutely right in terms of that awareness. Like, again, I would have been the same before I was aware of this. I didn't have the language for it. I had no idea that actually a lot of the behaviors displayed in any given time, you know, after a result or during a competition, actually you may be replacing yourself in a parent position or a child position, you know, just depending on what was going on. So really, really interesting stuff.
Well, and I suppose I was really lucky to work in coach education at a time when the coach shifted from being the technical expert that tells you what to do to being someone who facilitates exceptional learning for the athlete. I was really fortunate to be around during that time, actually, but definitely the expert was deeply judgmental. You know, I remember coming out of that junior section, going to play for the county, for example, and that environment was a much more hostile, you know, fixed mindset environment, where there was a lot of controlling parent and critical parent behaviors, and it brought out a completely different part of me as a player. But as an athlete, you don't really, you know, you don't notice it in yourself. However, there's been such a big culture change within sport now, you know, and the coach has a very different stigma, you know, in that respect.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Team, that's my presentation. Again, it's a bit of a light touch. We could go very deep on these subjects, but a bit of a light touch with the storytelling around 4 things that, you know, I learned then as a 10, 11-year-old. Very fortunate, really, to be in that junior section, and I still use it as a 40-year-old. You know, in executive coaching with the UN, and still used it within high performance coaching and coach education within sport. You know, the same principles apply all the way through. Thank you.
Gary, thanks very much. Really like the stuff around the growth mindset there, really interesting stuff. Again, I'll open the floor up for any questions. If anybody wants to put their camera on and ask a question, or again, post it in the group chat. Again, if we've no questions now, we can always gather some up towards the end. If we've got a bit of time, we can cover anything then. So again, if you do think of anything, please just post them in the group chat and we'll collate them all towards the end. If there's no questions, then we'll move on to the third speaker of the evening. I'd like to introduce Gary Wallace. Gary has 17 years experience coaching from young children through to youth international players. Gary is also a youth physical literacy specialist, a Sports Coach UK tutor, and a Sport NI tutor. So I'll pass you over to Gary.
Thank you, Keith. And thanks to the guys before me as well there. Some very interesting stuff. And yeah, so hopefully I can add to that. So hopefully you can all see this. So tonight I'm going to talk about recovery. And as I say, we do have 25 minutes. I'll just check my watch there. And we're going to delve in just to a few things. More so I'm going to try as much as I can give practical advice on this so we can actually implement it. So as Keith alluded to there, my name is Gary Wallace, director now of my own company, Core NI, which really we focus on delivering physical activity and well-being to all youth, really, but to everyone we work with. Very fortunate, just this last month, I've been, we call it a promotion maybe within the organization, but physical preparation, strength and conditioning. I don't even know what title I was given, but I work for the Northern Ireland senior men's team now, along in the medical team, along with the other sports scientists and physios and doctors. So fantastic insight too of the stuff that we've brought from underage and now implementing that into the senior environment. And actually in terms of recovery is probably it is a huge area for myself in that, and implementing it as well too from a youth player to a senior player, and how they react, how you communicate is massive. It's huge. So something that I'm really enjoying actually. So why recovery? The rate and quality of your recovery could be more important in your training. So some of us can get fixated on, we need to train. Again, depending on the level, depending on your coaches around, even if I'm working in elite sport, some coaches believe that they need to train more. These guys are doing this and we're doing that. It's like, okay, well, how's that relating to your recovery? Are you giving yourself the right amount of time, the right preparation to recover? Are you setting stuff up pre, post, during even for recovery in terms of supplementation? So there's so much that the recovery can help them actually with your training and performance, which is what we're all looking for. Another side too we're looking for is probably the time the season you're in. So is it recovery, which we would namely say in season? So if it's match, so for example, when we're away now with the Northern Ireland team, we're playing 3 matches inside 10 days. So for us, what strategies can we put in place that the guys are ready to be available for selection, and that they can use every strategy that we can think of and we can use so to get them ready for the game. The other side of it is, are you in pre-season? So you may actually be looking for adaptations in the body, and some of your recovery strategies that you use for performance may have a negative effect on your pre-season training. One of the big ones at the minute, I'll show examples of that is ice baths. Does that actually reduce adaptation as well in the body by, with blood flow and reducing the temperature of the body? and helping with that adaptation. So there's a lot of research on that it does for resistance training, but then it can still have a positive effect on the cardiovascular system and anybody who is training in that modality as well. So it's a minefield. We all know that. The other thing then as well, to bring it into that, recovery strategies too for an individual sport versus a team sport. So for some individual sports, we can actually pinpoint what energy systems they've really been using that day, maybe how much actually energy they've expended, what type of training day it is. In a lot of team sports, you're using a variety of energy systems, using a variety of things that you really need to concentrate on. So how do we recover well from that? Even positional play. How do some guys, are they hitting their high speed running? Or some guys haven't hit it? Maybe we need to add in that bit of training so that they can recover. So maybe we're even reducing the risk of injury with them. There's so much in it. And then also the intensity. So the intensity of your training. We don't use the same recovery strategies for every training session, because not every training session may not be the same. So are you working in a higher heart rate zone? Are you working in a lower? Even your game, and this is where we get a little bit into why we should monitor. How intense was the game? How intense was it? Was it, even if we are playing, for example, Gaelic, sometimes we feel that, and the research is there, that intensity rises in a championship game compared to maybe a league game where we're playing a lower position team or a team maybe depleted. But we have to think about, right, what recovery do we need? Do we need more time? Do we need more quality of recovery? Do we need to put other aspects into that? So that's again a little bit on whey recovery. And just to go on for that too, again, this is probably more into the training side. So without getting over caught up in recovery too, we can possibly undertrain or even overtrain. So what we need to do is we need to monitor. So, and it'll help us with our training and our recovery. So the first question you must ask yourself is, what are the demands of your sport? How far, what many distance are you running? What's your high speed? What's your acceleration, deceleration? If you're playing a field-based sport, if you are training for any long distance endurance sport, what training zones are you in? Are you constantly in that training zone 1 or 2, right, 4 or 5, or are you in that no man's land, as they call it, maybe zone 3? And is that going to have an effect on your recovery and your performance as well? So ways we can do this: GPS. So having a GPS system, I know the price of them actually coming down. So even as an individual, it's probably something that you could invest in for yourself, and it'll actually help on both ends on determining what type of training you're doing, and also then to how much recovery you may need. And as well as that, then to what metrics, what are you measuring to within that? And again, that depends on your sport. Your RPEs sound quite simple. Even we started as well too. I'm working with another Gaelic team, and we have actually asked them for readiness to train, something quite simple. So how are you before your training? So simple, out of 1 to 10, I give them a little scale. So your readiness to train before you actually get on and do the training session, rather because it's in your training program, oh, I'm going to need to do it. It's okay, well, have I recovered well enough? Am I feeling? Is there any other external stressors that are coming in? Family, work, relationships, stuck in the house because of COVID, and I'm looking at the same 4 walls all the time. All of these things have to come in. So how ready are you to train? Then what was your training session like? So your RPE, the Borg scale, is what we normally use a metric of 1 to 10. 10 being, I think, and that I just cannot move, I'm crawling. 1 being that was a walk. And if you haven't used RPE, and maybe even if you have, what I find, especially working with some youth, a lot of the youth, is the education on that. So just look up RP as well, rather than going every training session was a 7. 7 is actually tough. 7 is a tough session, and just because your mate beside you, if you're working in a team sport and a thing, and someone's going around asking RP, just because he says 7 doesn't mean it was a 7 for you. All right, and that's a big thing too when you look at heart rate as well. simple thing again, with heart rate monitors with their GPS as well, but measuring your own heart rate and having a little graph, even at the side of your bed at a notepad, it doesn't cost anything. Take your heart rate and write it down, and you will actually see then if your heart rate is actually maybe too high. You'll after a while you'll get your norms. If your heart rate is maybe working too hard, maybe you aren't ready to train. Maybe that will have an effect then too of how you can train. So maybe your central nervous system just isn't ready for that, and that's a good thing, and it's a good one where you can actually find where your resting heart rate is. So first thing in the morning, getting up and recording that. We would do a lot of wellness screening, and there's so many apps now out there. There's so much, and it's really just to see for yourself. If you're doing it, if you're a coach, it's fantastic for you to get a little bit more of an insight on your players. So things like sleep duration, sleep quality, muscle soreness, your mood, your even that readiness to train. So all of these, so you're getting in the psychological and physiological factors that may influence their recovery. So yeah, it's a simple thing you can do. Again, might be a bit of investment, or if you are training for yourself, a simple screening that you might be able to see a pattern. And that's really what we're looking for. Is there patterns there? Is there something? Because we would always ask this question. We would take wellness when we're away in any camp with any teams. It's the same thing. Does it work? We don't know. When does it come up? Is it better just match day -1, match day +1? Normally a match day, they're all buzzing anyway. They're all going to give you all 5s. So you're like, okay, are they actually feeling all right? Or they don't want to tell the manager that they're actually had the worst night's sleep ever and it might affect their performance. So there's so much that can go around that. Testing as well. So for example, a lot of field-based sports, we would do some testing, for example, like a knee to wall, an active straight leg, and a groin squeeze. Once you have your norms, then you can work off that. So if you actually see maybe, for example, your groin squeeze, the strength isn't there, it may be a bit of a flag to go, okay, well, am I actually ready to train here? Or I put beside it here protocols, maybe like as Kevin was saying there too as well, like training and conditioning yourself on your core stability, maybe having an effect on all of that. But is there a protocol in place that I can go and I can say, okay, hamstrings are a bit tight, I'll go do my hamstring protocol. If I'm feeling all right, it's going to like prehab before I can go out and train. And then how do you react? Every single person is different. Every single person is different. We have guys who match day +1, so a day after the game, may not be able to move out of bed. Then we have other guys then who you're flying out, but on match day +2, you're taking them to the pitch in a wheelchair. It's like, my God, I'm not mentioning no names either, but some of them. And then you probably have the other group who are like, I'm going to play in this and say I'm just a little bit sore, so I don't want to train. So you have everything to come with. But again, that's perspective of the coach, but also the perspective of the athlete. How do you react to your competition, to your training? What training modality do you really struggle at? High intense, low intensity, recovering, things like that we need to look at. So we're just going to take you through now the pillars of recovery here. So we've got sleep, nutrition, movement, mindset, and then other strategies. So sleep. And if I had 25 minutes, I would just do it all on sleep. It's as simple as that. It is the most effective, the cheapest, everything. I think if you want to know anything more, I would highly recommend a book, Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep. Unbelievable. Like, just, I think his first initial thing was what if I told you there was a drug out there that improved your performance, improved your mood, improved your confidence, blah 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 blah, and what if I told you now it's actually free? It's as simple as that. It is so, and not only for performance, for health. The health benefits of sleep is phenomenal. So you don't even have to be an athlete, even in coaches as well. Really important. We literally cannot survive without sleep. That is the bottom line. We sometimes wear like a badge of honor, saying, "Oh, I was up last night. I did this here. Oh, I can survive in 3 hours sleep." Short term, you may think you can, but I do not want to see your health bill later on in later life, and you would probably be just sending yourself to an early grave. Simple as that. So get that badge of honor away. Nobody cares. So sleep deprivation, you're talking anything from 6 hours or less a night. That's defined sleep deprivation, and it does reduce how quick you recover, your decision making, your well-being, everything along those lines. You have 4 stages of sleep. So you have 3 in non-REM sleep, and in your REM sleep where you get your dreams. So I'll talk a little bit probably in naps, but your non-REM sleep is stage 1 is where, you know, the one where you're watching TV and you went, no, I wasn't sleeping. That's stage 1. And then stage 2, you start getting in, and this is maybe where we would recommend people, if they're going to nap, if you're going to do a short nap, you're napping between stage 1 and 2. Stage 3, you really get in deep, start getting into a bit of a deeper sleep. And this time, sometimes when you wake up a bit groggy. So if you're sleeping, if you're taking a nap, I would recommend 20 minutes. If you want to go over 20 minutes, I would recommend 90 minutes, and that's a full sleep cycle. And again, throughout the week, we should be aiming for 37 sleep cycles. So 90 minutes is a sleep cycle, 37 cycles in a week. And I'll show you the next slide, which is going to be actually really important, why we just shouldn't go, oh, well, I'll get 6 here and I'll get 7 there. And oh, tell you what, I'll catch up on the weekend. We're not doing that anymore. Just hopefully we don't do that anymore after this. Alcohol and food have a major effect too. So alcohol as well. And again, it just increases our body temperature by the time it's getting processed in your liver, and it might give us that we spike when you wake up 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. You go, oh, need to go to the toilet now. And food as well too. So the sugar getting processed in our body. So the type of food, not all food's kind of bad for that. And also really important, not just for players, but for staff and coaches. You know, our decision making, everything, we need to be on our game when we're working with our athletes. If you're sleep deprived, that's going to have a negative effect on everything, physically, emotionally. So it's a big, huge area. This really breaks it down. So sleep hygiene. What am I on there? I think I started on, I think it's 15 minutes. So sleep hygiene, 3 areas really. Your sleep duration, minimum 7 hours per night. Ideally 8 to 10 hours. Nighttime sleep is number 1, and then get in your naps. Okay, so that's the big thing. If you are struggling at the minute, if you really think, no, I'm only getting 5, 6, whatever hours, start increasing it only by 30 minutes per night. Don't go, okay, I'm getting 5 hours, I'm going to smash me 8. Okay, slowly build that up. Your sleep quality, get a sleep routine. Okay, so find out something maybe that relaxing. Can you power down, put your phone away, etc. Drink a chamomile tea, chill out, you know, just switch off, maybe read anything that's non-screen. And what I do as well too with mine is I set a little reminder on my phone. It just comes up, it says put phone down. So just a simple strategy that might help. Power down technology, they recommend 2 hours, but I would always tell athletes as well too, even if you can start off 20 minutes before you go, because they reckon that's what the research saying takes that long. Some of us, for the brain secretes melatonin to help us kind of relax. And when we look at blue light, it's kind of like tricking it, saying, oh, hold on a minute, I thought it was nighttime. We've got this coming through. So 20 minutes or so before the body starts to come down. Sleep in a bat cave, like make it cool. Turn off that radiator, or turn the radiator down in your room a little bit. No hot water bottles, no nothing, because we go to sleep by when our body temperature cools. That's how we regulate it as well. Make sure it's really dark. Any TVs or anything, my first thing is get them out of your room anyway. You shouldn't have a TV in your room. They say the TVs are bedrooms for 3 things, 3 S's. So sleeping, sick, and then the other one. All right, so I'll let you spell that out. Don't know who's on tonight. Can't say those words. So turn off all stuff. Avoid caffeine. Again, I would avoid caffeine from 1 o'clock. We have an enzyme that breaks down caffeine. Unfortunately, people like the Italians have a really good way of breaking that down. We don't. Caffeine's kind of like, we weren't really born with caffeine. It's only become cool now. you see people like Cookie. Cookie's getting a touch here, but you see people like Cookie and never seen he'll be only a cup of tea man sitting in Caffeine Hero now with all his mates. Like, it's a kind of cool thing. And avoid the sugar. So on here then, so sleep timing, my face and all again, I can't get it because I'm on the thing. But anyway, it's go to bed and wake up at the same time. That is key. Get yourself, and the reason why is because we've got a circadian rhythm, which is a 24-hour internal clock, and it's related to light and dark. So the first thing is when you wake up, get into routine and get outside as early as you can, especially now in COVID. A lot of us are stuck inside, and I can guarantee you, if we ask some people, they may not even seen the light today. So if it's raining, whatever, even if it's raining over, you're still going to expose the natural light. Nap, no past. I think I put 1 o'clock there. I should have put one, at least 2. If you're playing a match or a game, a competition on the game day, 20 minutes. For recovery day, I would say 2 hours. Nutrition. So with nutrition, I think that's all kind of on the sleep. I think so. So if anybody hopefully has any questions on that, that should be that. So nutrition, first thing is I'm not a nutritionist, so I'm not going to delve too much into this. There is some fantastic people even within around us who are awesome at that. So go search them up. But again, I just give you some practical tips. So timing and type is huge to help with our recovery as well as our performance, really. So pre-training, are we feeling right? If we're feeling right for the performance, then that's going to help our performance. But if we are totally depleted, then that's going to have an effect of how much we have to then replenish those stores. So we will probably have to, if you're playing or a competition, for example, and you're one of your training days and you're out running and you go, I just didn't have the energy. Now, was it your sleep? Was it other stressors? It might have been food. So you still have to replenish those stores so you can recover well enough to train the next time or compete the next time. During as well too, as soon as we can start consuming nutrition, it's going to help that process. It can in some sports as well help us instant for the performance, but then building on. And then post, again, we can get massively into this. So you're talking about your 20-minute window, this magic window, people say, and the reason is because you can metabolize a lot better. So you're taking stuff that's quite instant. So this is when you can smash out the pizzas, get the pizza in about 20 minutes. So go for that stuff. If you fancy all that nice wee stuff, that 20-minute gap. After that, in a 2-hour period, a substantial meal. Now, again, depends on your weight. Maybe depends on how much fluid you lose when you train. You can measure that simply by weighing yourself at the start of a training session, weighing yourself at the end or at a game. And that'll equate then to how many kg. So we work a liter per kg. So whatever you lose, then you can replenish with that. So that's massive. Hydration is a big thing, especially a lot of us are pretty keen on hydration for performance, and we seem to miss out hydration for recovery, but it's key. It is key as well. So that's kind of it. Again, depending on the type of your training as well too, and what area you're in. If you're in a competition, maybe replenish with a lot of carbs. You replenish with carbs. Maybe if it's adaptation, you're focusing more on protein. Even in adaptation as well, I know we've got some lovely things of berries, but maybe the antioxidants in those stuff, maybe they don't support the adaptation for muscle growth. So just things we can be wary of. And then the other things is using up your energy that we may need to add an extra fuel. Work, family, education, stress. These take up a lot of energy, and this is related to nutrition and to sleep as well. And then when is your next training session? When are you training next? A lot of us, maybe if we aren't elite, we could be having a training session at night. Maybe we're running home and then we have to go, maybe training before we go to work. Then what have you yet? Even though your nighttime routine might be, all right, well, I don't eat after a certain time, I can't eat. Well, you might have to because you're training again first thing in the morning. Or your normal thing of, well, I eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But what if you're training 2 times in that day? What if you're training, you know, that night, the next day, and maybe that night again, then your nutrition is going to have to be key, how much storage you have to refuel that. And that the big thing is refuel, rehydrate, rebuild. That's kind of what we're looking at. Time-wise, Keith, Michael, good?
Yeah, doing okay.
Thanks. Now, can I have a number as well? All right, then maybe that. Okay, so movement.
I would say probably 2 or 3 minutes left, Gary.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so movement. We'll go quickly just through this. So active recovery, getting ourselves moving. I don't like calling things exercise either. A lot of the time, I love the word movement. We should all move. We're designed and born to move. You ever see a child squat? That's the way we're meant to do. We reverse that and go the other way. Again, the theory and research out there on resistance training, match day or game day or competition, +1 again for maybe if it's a field-based sport, if you're playing football, maybe it's quite leg dominant. You can maybe then throw in an upper session that'll increase the testosterone for recovery and also increase blood flow. So maybe to help with the recovery process. Non-impact options, pool, on a bike. Yoga, I always think this thing, I always find that funny when some people say, oh, I did a yoga session for my recovery. If you've actually went to an intensive yoga session, it's not a recovery. So just be careful because you are taking and stretching your muscles and getting that full range. Just be careful in the intensity of it. Make sure it's for recovery and not for yoga. Relax, enjoy other activities. Get out if you want to go for a hike in the mountains, you want to go on a mountain bike. This is the time maybe to use it, and also involving family. Mindset, mental recovery. Some probably I should have put way first because it's again what we neglect. With our para and our sympathetic nervous system, whenever we're in our para nervous system, you know, when we're increasing our adrenaline and everything, and then our sympathetic nervous system when we relax. So we want to get more into that, and we can do that a number of ways. So first one's visualization. So visualizing, even if it's the performance in a positive way, visualizing yourself switching off, breathing techniques, box breathing, simple technique. And even now, I think because of time, but I want you to try a technique just for breathing. So I want you to place a hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. And I want you to take a breath in and breathe out. Now, when you did that, did anybody's hand here move, the top? Did you feel your chest move or anything? Okay, this is when we talk about breathing, when we need to breathe deep through your belly. If I was to tell you that I was to scare you and go boo, you would go like this. Now I tell you to take a deep breath, that's your nervous system coming in, your fight or flight. If I was to tell you to take a deep breath in, some of us go, again, we're activating that fight or flight. We want to relax the body. So breathing from the diaphragm. So this hand should be coming out and in, out and in. So you're breathing, and another one is nose breathing as well. Some fantastic research on that. If you want to add that with cold water submersion, if you're really into it, there's not too much science behind them, but Wim Hof is the man to go for that. I tried the 30 breaths and nearly fell through the shower window and nearly passed out in the cold water. So doing that one, it was like, okay. So I just go in the lock instead. Meditation, massive fan of meditation. And 2 things you can use: Headspace app, very good for guided meditation, and Insight Timer, which is really good for playing softer music, and you have a lot more variety on it. So my mindset is massive, guys, and we always talk about the physical recovery, but mental recovery is just as important. And get away from your sport. We cannot be involved, tuned in 100% every single day, even if it's a different sport, maybe, but reading, getting involved in something else, spending time with family, literally, it's so hard at times, but just switch off, get away from it, because it can have a massive effect on us. And then quickly, I think the time's nearly up now. So other recovery strategies, you can supplement all the areas. You can supplement nutrition. You could even supplement sleep. I don't even know if they're legal here because a lot of research in America, but melatonin, Compression garments. So normally we'd use those for lower body. Soft tissue massage, you can do that self with foam rolling, trigger point, myofascia, rolling a ball on your feet. Massage gun now have become quite popular, so using those, or sports massage therapist. Dry needle and coupling can come in there as well. A pull session and protocols too that you've designed that we alluded to a little bit earlier. So yes, I think that is me. Started at 38 or 808 and 37. Sorry, guys. So
Just about on time, Gary. We'll let you
yeah, I know. Back in the day, I probably should tell the story. The very, very first time I started working with Keith was way back in Korea. How many years ago was that? In the sports development?
back about 15 now.
No, those were the days. Remember when we did that? Oh, sorry, I'll go on mute here.
Well, listen, Gary, thanks very much. Have we any questions for Gary?
Gary, I have a question. I've asked everybody one tonight, and I'm probably going to keep that going. And you're right about the caffeine. I didn't know what a latte was until I was 25. I suppose my question to you is, Gary Worgan mentioned about moving away from the coach's instructor and that parent approach. Have you seen a move in sort of the physical development coach world, where actually identifying things like recovery strategies and seeing how players are feeling takes a much more interpersonal relationship with the athletes? And actually, as you say, no athlete wants to tell the coaches or the staff that they're tired or they're sore or whatever, because they might jeopardize their place the next game. Does that take a little bit of interaction and softer skills with the physical development coach to work that out, what the ideal strategies are?
Massive. I think it's one thing which we're trying to implement is education as well. Sometimes athletes don't know the reason why. Oh, you're getting us to do this again. Do we have to do this? Do we have to do that? So rather than going, okay, right, it's recovery session, 15 minutes of bike, 15 minutes stretch, blah, blah. Right, lads, this is going to help here. And we're actually going to bring in now a little bit of breathing technique. Oh, why are we doing this? Oh, we're trying to relax the body, except things like that. And then knowing your players, like that is huge. Like, that's what I say. My biggest thing, I just love helping people perform. I love helping people to serve them, to do that. And that's I love coaching. That's the main reason. And I work hard and research and different things, but it's a personal connection. Coaching is all about connection. So knowing your players, knowing what like some people say water baths don't work. Okay, but if your player turns around and he gets in the water bath and he comes in and goes, geez, my legs are feeling great. Brilliant. Super. Get in that water bath again then after the next game. So like that's kind of knowing your players, a psychological effect in it, rather than going the whole way down a science road. So I think that answered your question.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's a move away from, sets and reps, and that's been the only important bit, is the stuff you can measure. There's a lot of stuff that you can't measure that's important too.
Gary, can I just ask you a quick question there? You mentioned about wellness screening. How often would you do that? Or would you, like, I'm a middle distance coach, and I have a group of 18, 19-year-old athletes. Would you screen daily, or are you only screening on session days type thing? Or how would you go around that?
Two ways that, again, depending on your connection. We're quite fortunate we see the players when we're in camp every day. So before they come to breakfast, they can do it with us. What I have done is with other ones, simple setting up like a Google form, which they can go, or a Google sheet that they can put it in and do that daily. I think especially it's an education for younger athletes. If we can get them doing that then they can self-regulate themselves, will be fantastic. If it's really struggling to start off with buy-in, that readiness to train for me is a good one, because I use that with some clubs and it's just one answer, one number. So how ready are you to train? And all it does, it sets up a communication pathway. So if they come up and 7-7s, but you see Mickey's a 4, before training starts, you can go and chat to Mickey. Say, Mickey, you're 4. God, look, new baby in the house and I haven't slept well. But Mickey might be an absolute like dog, and he's just like, I'm going to work hard here. Halfway through the session, Mickey just looks flumped, and you're going, Mickey, what's wrong with you? Oh, the baby, I couldn't get no sleep. So he's already put himself through that pressure because you couldn't start up that conversation because Mickey wasn't going to come to you anyway. So that's obviously an example like with adults, but with youth guys, it's if you can do that in confidence, we find that as well too. If it's private as well, whenever you're taking wellness course, again, it's like the RP thing. If you're doing it in a group, they'll all do the same as their mates.
Yeah.
But if somehow you can do it that it's private and only to you, you're opening that sense of trust, that pathway that you have with them, and just say, you know, and guys and everybody who's dealing with youth, if you're working with youth, thing on here, they are going to need us massively, like massively, whenever they come out of this, and be that one good adult, be that one person that they can turn around and say it's a 4, and it's a 4 because of bullying, emotionally, anxiety, we don't know. So yeah, if that hopefully answers your question.
Yeah, it does. I'm quite lucky in the sense that they're all very honest, so they'll be all right.
Good. Yeah, you're lucky.
So no, that's helpful. Cheers.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, we'll move on. I'd like to introduce Wendy. Wendy Henderson is the anti-doping consultant at Sport NI and continues to develop the Pure Winner Clean Sport Education Programme. She is also a national trainer and doping control officer with UK Anti-Doping and Sport Ireland. Hand over to you, Wendy, to finish us off.
Cheers. Thanks, Keith. And thanks for the opportunity to have a chat with everybody today. So I thought it would be best to have a chat around what you need to know about clean sport if you're an athlete, or some of the coaches are on or parents are on today. And these are just a few of the things we'll cover very briefly in our 25 minutes that I have about the rules. So each sport has its own anti-doping rules, and those rules are based on the World Anti-Doping Association Code. And it's what the World Anti-Doping Agency that harmonizes the rules across the world. That's I'll use acronyms, and I'll have to stop using that and try and explain everything about the World Anti-Doping Agency. That's their video that's playing as we talk through. And they're there to level the playing field in sport, so that whenever a swimmer is lining up at the start line of the swimming pool, and they're looking across from left and right and looking at their opponents, that the best has been done, that the playing field is as level as can be. So in our little area of Northern Ireland, we have Sport Ireland and UK Anti-Doping, who are the two national anti-doping agencies that have jurisdiction in Northern Ireland. And your sport, it depends how your sport is affiliated. I know with athletes and rugby players and GAA and a few other sports on tonight. So if your sport's an All-Ireland sport, you're regulated by the Sport Ireland anti-doping rules. And if your sport's a UK sport, you're regulated by UK anti-doping rules. And they're both the same because they're based on the World Anti-Doping Agency Code, which is leveling the playing field. So we're going to talk a bit about your body, your responsibility, cover a bit of medication, supplements, as Gary mentioned, which is a sort of risk area in clean sport, and then just briefly what happens in a drug test. So one of the clauses in these anti-doping rules that underpins everything. Can you still see my screen there? Give me a wee thumbs up. Yeah, thank you. One of the clauses that underpins all the anti-doping rules is this clause of strict liability. The athletes are solely responsible for any prohibited substance found in their system. And I know tonight there's some younger athletes or under 18, and that still applies, whether you're regarded as a minor in the rules and under 18. the strict liability principle applies to everybody. And that's why it's really good for our education program to reach out to some of the parents and coaches as well. So what happens if you do take medication and you need medication, and medication can be a risk too? So realizing we've all sat for quite a while on our chairs, I'm going to set you a wee challenge to walk to your medicine, walk or run, because I've only 25 minutes. So run to your medicine cabinet and pick a medicine from your cabinet, whether it's one you take or whether it's something you take for a common cough and cold mixture. Just go and get it. I'm not going to ask you to share it. I don't want to see it, but just go and get it, please, quickly. You have 30 seconds. These are all sports people. Be as fast as you can. I love when the room turns blank. It's like, where's everybody gone? Perfect. So with everybody coming back, now I don't need to see your medication, keep it entirely to yourself. But in the chat bar there, I have put in a website called globaldro.com. And we'll see how quick you are at going into that website and working your way through to check the medication that you have picked from your medicine cabinet. If you didn't go and get one, here is a Lemsip medication that is in most people's cabinets and pretty much on every Tesco shelf in the garage sitting up. So take a wee minute just to check either your own medication or this Lemsip Max on the Global Dro website. Okay. Now, this is the website that if you purchase your medication in Northern Ireland or the UK, or you can see there's other countries on there that you can check if you've purchased your medication in Canada, Australia. It was really handy for the Commonwealth Games for the athletes to check whenever they were at the Gold Coast there in 2018. So our Lemsip Max, this was one that I checked at the weekend. And it pulls up a red, there's a bit like red and green, red for stop and green for go. So it pulls up a red here that our Lemsip Max Flu Lemon. And again, you can check with the result as to whether you've put in the right medication, because you might be a wee bit surprised at the result. And a lot of people are when they see the Lemsip or something that's simply down in your cupboard downstairs. So in competition, it's flagging up that Lemsip is red and is prohibited. So you can check, is this the Lemsip? Well, yeah, it says Lemsip Max Flu and Lemon. That's what we checked. It's coming up that it's prohibited in competition. But what does that mean? What is in competition? So in the World Anti-Doping Code, which sets the rules, I mentioned at the beginning, the in competition has changed from the 1st of January this year because the code was completely revised after massive consultation worldwide. So in competition now means the period commencing 1 minute before midnight on the day of a competition. So if the GAA, rugby players, the athletes are competing, no matter what time of the day you're competing, if that substance is in your body and there's a minute before the competition and you're drug tested, you will have a case to answer. So why is Lemsip Max goodness, lamps at max, why is it prohibited in competition? And it's okay out of competition. So the green out of competition is at all other times. The testers can turn up at a squad training camp. Out of competition, I would drug test athletes too. We can literally knock on athletes' doors and ask them for a sample. And that happens more with the high performance elite athletes that are on whereabouts. So let's have a look at our LEMSIP. Further down, and you can see if you've done your own search, you'll be able to scroll down all the various ingredients that are in the medication that you've searched for. So the LEMSIP max here, the paracetamol and the absorbic acid are fine, but it's this pseudoephedrine that is causing the problem for us. Now, some will be prohibited. You might just get it, it's not allowed in competition no matter what, but the pseudoephedrine actually comes up then that it's prohibited if there is a large amount of it in the urine sample that's collected by the drug testers whenever they collect their sample, and it gives you a bit of detail of that. And then under each of your searches, it actually tells you as well why that is. So it's classed as a stimulant within the prohibited list. And that's part of the rules within this World Anti-Doping Agency code. The prohibited list is updated every year and comes into the force on the 1st of January every year. So athletes are always encouraged to recheck their medication at the beginning of January if they're taking anything, to see if there's been any changes to the prohibited list. So our LEMSIP is a stimulant in the prohibited list, and what we encourage athletes to do as well is for every single one that did a search tonight, there will be a reference number, and that's unique to that search. So this was one that I did on Friday night, and it gives you the exact time down to the second that I did the research. And my reference number. So everyone tonight will have a unique one. And we encourage the athletes to, as you're a body, your responsibility. So to check all medication that you're taking. And when you get your search reference number, you can save it as a PDF and even email it across to yourself. So you're keeping a record that you have taken responsibility for what you're putting into your system. Global Draw, there's a few top tips for Global Draw, and rather than me going through them all, there's no one better than one of our Team GB Paralympic athletes, Ali Jawad. I don't know if any of you have heard of Ali. He's a GB powerlifter. He has no legs basically from the waist down. But he was at, he's aiming for Tokyo, and he actually suffers from Crohn's as well. So Ali is very, very passionate about making sure that he's taking the right medication, and is very passionate about educating athletes as well. So there's a little quick video, and I'll get Michael to give me a thumbs up if the sound is on here. Is there sound, Michael? Oh no.
Sorry, Wendy.
I'll let you go through because you can see the things I try and work out because of the sound. Perfect. So as Ali said in his very final page, there was Global Dro is a way to check your medication. But what do we do about supplements? And Gary mentioned supplements in his presentation there as something that athletes would use for their potentially their recovery or their fitness and well-being as well. But supplements in the clean sport end is a bit of a grey risk area. So I'm going to get you just to ask the question yourselves, are you taking supplements? And for a lot of athletes, they think of supplements as being the big powders that you spin out, get into your cup in the morning or before your workshop, post recovery. But supplements in clean sport terms can be anything from your herbal supplements, your vitamins, your minerals, and your fish oils. And the thing with the supplement industry is that it's not a regulated industry. So the supplements aren't manufactured to the same strict standards that our medications would be. And there is a website that we can go to be able to check our supplements, and it's called Inform Sport. And they have put together a bit of a video here, and hopefully the sound of this will work. I wonder if I turn that up. No sound. So supplements is a risk for athletes, and we would encourage all athletes to get their supplements batch tested or use the Inform Sport program. And even that, it's going right online, and I will pop into the chat bar the website address for the Inform Sport program. And things are beeping away here. So with the supplements then, it's assess the need for the supplements, which was something again that Gary was talking about. Do we actually need them? Do we need that big powder, or can we have our food first approach? Assess the risk through checking your supplements on Inform Sport, or actually going to the supplement company and asking, have these supplements been batch tested for use in elite sport, and assessing the consequences then, which is potentially with that strict liability clause at the very beginning, an anti-doping rule violation and a ban or a sanction from your sport. And unfortunately now, over the last number of years, the anti-doping rule violations in the UK and Ireland, nearly 40% of those sanctions that have been issued are down to supplement, somebody taking a supplement and not realising, and the cross-contamination in the manufacturing of those supplements. And if it says in the box it's going to get you bigger, faster, stronger, potentially there's maybe something in there that is a wee bit dodgy. So realising the time, I have what happens in a drug test, and the easiest way actually to talk about the drug tests in virtual is just through a video as well, because normally I would bring equipment and would have a real good hands-on demonstration of what happens in a drug test. But if you bear with me for 2 seconds, I'm going to stop sharing this screen and actually pull up this video on on the internet and share it with you. And then we can have some questions at the end. Any questions that you need to know about a drug test, I'm really happy to answer those for you at this point. So just give me 2 seconds. So I see if I can share this one, and hopefully the sound will come up for us at this point.
Under the National Anti-Doping Programme, Sport Ireland uses 2 methods of drug detection: direct detection for prohibited substances and methods, and indirect detection, which helps develop your athlete biological passport. Depending on the level at which you compete, you can be selected for testing in competition at an event or out of competition at any time and with no advance notice. If you have been selected for testing, a doping control officer or chaperone will explain your rights and responsibilities. You must report immediately to the doping control station, and the officer will stay at your side until the process is finished. You have rights, of course, like bringing a representative with you. You also have responsibilities too, including cooperating fully. If asked for a urine sample, the officer must witness the sample leave your body with a clear and unobstructed view. If blood, 2 to 4 small vials will be taken by a blood collection officer. The samples are sent to a WADA-accredited laboratory for analysis, but your personal details are not revealed. On receipt of the samples, laboratory staff check their integrity before opening sample A for analysis and securely storing sample B, which remains fully sealed. The results go to Sport Ireland and then to your national governing body, who will give you the results in about 6 weeks. That's it. The whole purpose of testing is to ensure that all athletes compete in a fair sporting environment where skill, experience, training and teamwork make the difference, not drugs. And we're making that a reality.
There we go. That's a real good summary of what actually happens with the testing process. Has anyone any questions they'd like to ask about the testing process? Just unmute yourself and ask away, or pop it into the chat bar. The key thing for some of the younger athletes that are on is that collection of a urine sample is actually observed by the testers. So the athletes are asked to roll their sleeve up, put their top up to their chest and their trousers down to their knees, and a completely unobstructed view of that urine sample is taken, and it's sealed then into both the A bottle and the B bottle, and the athletes will handle all the equipment. The testers just talk the athletes through that.
Wendy, can I ask a wee question? And I know this is part of the work that you're aiming to do, but like, would you still see a lot of athletes like surprised at the LAMSIP Max example, you know, when it comes to elements that are on that prohibited list?
Yes, you do. Athletes that haven't been educated, that are sort of coming through the talent ID, talent confirmation, talent pathway section, that potentially are diving into the swimming pool a club athlete and coming out nearly a national level athlete. Yes, they are surprised that there are things like that on the list. And some young athletes are maybe taking medications for skin problems that have steroid-based stuff in it, steroid-based creams that they don't realise that would go through into your blood system and potentially into your because a positive drug test. So it's getting the message out there that athletes, it's that strict responsibility. It's your body, your responsibility, and just making sure that they're aware to check all the time anything that you're putting into your system, and keeping your body clean and being aware of that's really, really important. And the testers can turn up at any point at a squad training. At times we've turned up and literally tested the whole team.
It's not something that can be taken for granted that those young athletes know, so we probably all have a role to try and educate them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly, Michael. And through the Sport NI Peer Winner programme, we've been working with the national governing bodies to develop strategies, structured and developing educators and national trainers to be either within the sports to be able to deliver those education themselves or
Seem to have lost you now, Wendy.
simply.
I was going to say, I wasn't sure if it was my internet broke
Yeah.
up. I think we lost you for a wee second there, Wendy.
You lost me. I was just going to say that was more or less me. My last couple of slides are just really information slides that there is the Pure Winner Twitter account that you can follow, and if anyone wants to get in touch, realizing some of this information is personal. I've put the anti-doping at Sport NI. Have I gone again?
No, still okay.
No,
Okay.
I'm still there.
Yeah, you're okay.
So that's just my contact details. If this has raised alarm bells with anybody, please take a screenshot or a photograph of that and send me a wee note, and I'm more than happy to chit chat to anybody through it. Okay.
Wendy, sorry, can I just ask you a quick question there? See,
Yeah,
young athletes or football players or whatever kind of sports people, at what
Yeah.
point do they become known to the anti-doping authorities? Is it when they're on a pathway, or is it if they will finish it? Let's take my sport, athletics. If they finish in a certain percentage or in a certain place in a big race, at what point do they become known?
Yeah, and what you've pulled up there, John, potentially in athletics is the risk is that if we turn up at the Northern Ireland Open Championships and the selection for 400 meters potentially could be done in lane numbers or in first, second, third place finishing positions. So that athlete could go from a talent club athlete and end up being drug tested at that competition. So it's very different in each sport, but the likes of those individual sports in entering a Northern Ireland Championships, you potentially could come under the remit for being drug tested. Yeah, so it is a risk.
And would that be kind of more like the senior championships rather than the junior underage championships?
More in Northern Ireland, yes. But I do a bit of work for European athletics as well, and drug testing at the under 18s and the under 20, like European championships would take place as well. Yeah, but more locally, it would be the senior championships.
I was thinking when you got into that international level, it would probably be more prevalent. But if you're looking at a good club athlete running in a Northern Ireland senior or Northern Ireland junior, you know, it might be hit and miss probably. Okay.
Yeah, the seniors definitely. I would really encourage education to anyone entering the Northern Ireland Senior Championships.
Okay.
Definitely.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, Wendy, thanks very much for that. I think that website you gave out is a very powerful tool that guys can take away with them. Sounds like a very intrusive process getting the drug testing done. You know,
yeah.
So, look, if there's any further questions for Wendy, if not, we did have one question there. We have 5 minutes left, and we have one question in the group chat, which was for Kevin. If you don't mind fielding one more, and that question was: does the initial control movement help fix misalignment, or would that be an additional to other exercises in a session? So does the initial control movements fix misalignment?
I think it depends on what's causing the misalignment. If it's a medical condition, then perhaps not. You need to seek advice of a medical professional. But if the misalignment is through the muscular imbalance, then it I'm not sure if you can see, I got a flexi stick here. And if you attach some sort of elastic band to it and pull, that's going to pull you out of alignment. So ideally, we've got a kind of a yin and a yang of a thing. So we've got a muscle pulling this way, but we have a second muscle pulling that way. And I suppose it goes back to the misalignment of, you know, I can pull that in both directions. You can see it's not bending anywhere. This can give to allow flexibility. This can give to allow extension. But it's about having that muscle balance, or balance between strength of muscles. And I suppose if you go back to the slide that I was looking at, which showed the anterior pelvic tilt, and it's because of weak abdominals but strong muscles in the back, or because of tight hip flexors but weak hip extensors in relation to the glutes. So if we can get the balance of those correct, it should correct that. The initial movements right at the start, the control movements, the cat, camel movements, the hip extension movement with a little bit of a roll at the moment to switch the pelvis on before you go into the hip extension, and the bird dog, that's going to give you some sort of control mechanism which is going to pull that imbalance back into place, or the misalignment back into place if it's muscular. But if it's structural, then obviously go and see a medical professional and work on it accordingly. Does that answer the question for the individual, do you think?
I think that should, hopefully. Listen, on that, we'll draw a close to this evening. I'd just like to finish by saying thank you to each of our speakers for tonight. It's been a very worthwhile evening. And thank you to everyone who has come in and listened to them. We will send out a follow-up email with this and post a link to the recording, which will go on YouTube. And we will get out the presentations as well, because there was some good exercises in that people would want to follow. So thank you very much to everybody for joining us tonight. Have a good rest of the evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.